Welcome to the Nerd Party.
I think people are perverts.
I've maintained that. That's the foundation of my career.
Welcome to House of Fincher, the show on the Nerd Party Network that examines the works of David Fincher all the way from the start to the upcoming Mank that is going to be premiering on Netflix. I am John Mills, and it is my pleasure, my absolute pleasure, to be joined once again by two wonderful and esteemed Fincher scholars, Brandon Shea Mutala and Tristan Riddell. Brandon, how are you today?
I'm doing really good. I'm feeling really spry. I'm feeling, younger and more vitalized every second of every day.
Very cool. And Tristan, how are you feeling today?
Well, I heard some people whispering that this podcast might not last another episode, but maybe not.
Yeah, that's possible. For myself, I declare I'm getting younger as we keep recording, but I'm still not sure where my accent is from. So that brings us, of course, to our discussion about Benjamin Button, the curious case of Benjamin Button, to be exact. Before we get into that, just want to remind you, go over to thenerdparty.com, check out all of the cool shows there. Feel free, if you're enjoying this show, to go ahead and give us a star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. We would really appreciate it. And so here we are, the curious case of Benjamin Button. So let's kick off the way that we love to on this series and talk about our first experiences with the curious case of Benjamin Button. And so, Brandon, I will kick it to you first. What is your first experience with Benjamin Button? When did you first run across this charming gentleman?
So I first run across this film when it came out on the Criterion Blu-ray release. And I bought it because at that time, as I've mentioned on this podcast before, I was buying everything Criterion. And this was, not that long after my previous failed love of Zodiac, and I was still kind of on the downslide of there. So I wasn't really too interested in seeing this movie. And I remember the first time that I saw it, I absolutely despised this movie the first time. And
really?
Yeah, so it solidified in my mind that David Fincher was no longer a great talent when I first saw The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Damn.
So it was like a complete train wreck. Was it like at the end of it, was it that sort of thing where it was just a disappointment feeling, or was it turn it off and say, screw this movie, I hate this so much? Like, was it one of those visceral reactions, or just more of a deflated balloon?
It was a deflated balloon. Like I put it away and I put it on my shelf. And like, when did this disc come out? Like, this disc came out, 12 years ago or 11 years ago or something like that? I haven't revisited it since. Right. So it took until this podcast before I revisited this movie because I was just so let down by it.
Really? I'm going to be extremely, extremely interested then to see what you thought on this rewatch. But Tristan, you seem shocked by Brandon's reaction. So I'm curious, did yours go differently?
Mine did go differently. I'm not shocked at someone not liking the movie. I'm totally, as I've said repeatedly, I'm not one of those people. You can dislike whatever you want. And more power to you. But just the idea that that it was so soul crushing, it was so disappointing that you're like, Fincher, the master, is no longer a good filmmaker.
Yeah.
That is quite the feat. That is quite the feat. No, with me, I saw this in the theater, and I saw this with my lady love, my girlfriend at the time, now wife. And this came out the year I graduated college. And I was so excited to see it because I was going to see Fincher in the theater, and this was, my wife is a huge fan of Fincher, and so we were able to do it together. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like, I loved every moment of it. I was along for the ride. I got super emotional in many places, and I can't remember being that invested in a fictional character's happiness before and since. And one of my favorite memories to hate was when we were walking out of the theater. We walked into the mall out of the theater, and I'm arm in arm with a girl, and I hear people behind me, like there's a group of people, a group of teenagers behind me, and they're saying like, "Oh, what'd you think of it? Did you like it?" And everybody's like, "Yeah, no, it was great. It was really great. I really liked it." And then there's one guy who just kind of goes, "Eh," and then was like, "Well, what was wrong? Why didn't you like it?" He's like, "I thought it was, it just wasn't believable." And he's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, they never explained why he was aging backwards." It took everything in me not to turn around and just go, "You tool."
Yes, well, I'm sure that person went on to join social media and get into debates about canon. So, there's that too.
I was beside myself.
It's interesting because I liked this movie. Okay, when this came out in December 2008, and so my second child was about a month and a half old, and so not much time for the theaters at that point. And so I didn't encounter this until home video, and I did really enjoy it when we saw it for the first time. When I sat down with Agent Bunn and watched, I was like, "Hey, this is really cool." On this rewatch, I had a different reaction than my memory gave to me. But actually, before we get to emotional touch points and stuff like that, one of the things I was really fixated on with it this time was I know that this was a very big step in terms of a lot of computer effects. And we have talked about how Fincher is relentlessly a perfectionist with his digital effects. So, I'll kick to you first, Tristan. Like, what do you think he hit his mark on this with the digital effects? Or do you think that this was something that is admirably ambitious that didn't age as well as it should have? Or where do you think it falls in terms of the technical achievement?
I think in terms of technical achievement, this is a pioneer. This movie is why we have Marvel de-aging, why we have Scorsese de-aging. Like this is the original. This is like, yes, people have done it before. Yes, people have tried computer generated heads on bodies. People have tried computerized de-aging. Yes, that's happened before, but this was the first time it was done to this scale and this well and this professionally. Mm-hmm. And it was nominated for the Oscars for this. It got tons of technical awards and not just at the Oscars. And I believe that this was Fincher's first directing Oscar nomination. Was for A Case of Benjamin Button. And when seeing it in the theater, you're just like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is insane. The type of blending, the type of light, the shadow, the luminescence of between light and skin, and the texture." I was blown away in the theater, and seeing it on disc with a Criterion disc where it's mastered a little bit better than normal Blu-rays. I was still impressed, and then just watching it again just a couple of days ago, you can definitely tell you're just like, okay, that's a digital character. Like we're seeing a digital face. We can absolutely see that. We can tell that we're all we're all smart guys. We're all intelligent film critics who've seen bad green screen. We've seen good green screen. We've seen good digital characters. We've seen bad digital characters. But I can't is it more obvious to me now in the year of 2020 than it was in 2008? Yes. Am I bold enough to say it doesn't hold up the way it should? No. Does that answer your question, John?
It does. It absolutely does. Do you fall in the same camp, Brandon?
I would say so, yeah. Like, this is an extremely, extremely important film. And even watching it back in 2009 for the very first time, I realized how important this movie was and what they were doing with this technology. While I think that the de-aging looks much better than the aging of Brad Pitt's character and the de-aging of, oh my goodness, what's her name?
Cate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett. Goodness, I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry. The de-aging of Kate Blanchett is better than the aging of her. I think that's just something that happens in makeup in general. I think that aging in general has never looked really well when it comes to makeup and digital effects. And Tristan thinks I'm insane.
I do. I think you're crazy on that. Okay, well, I agree with you that I think that aging makeup can be so bad. I mean, you think about like what you saw in Back to the Future, Part 2, like that, like pretty much that's what I think of whenever I see bad aging makeup. And so, Brandon, I think you're completely right in that realm. But where I think you're 100% wrong is where you think that the de-aging on Cate Blanchett is better than the digital de-aging on Cate Blanchett is better than the makeup aging. I think that's crazy talk, because I think the de-aging in Cate Blanchett actually wasn't that great. I thought that they could have done a better job. That you could tell that they spent tons of their digital budget on the Benjamin Button character, and Cate Blanchett kind of just got what was left over. And because I felt like what they mainly did with Cate Blanchett was just kind of smoothed her. And there's way more to de-aging than just smoothing the face. And so she kind of looks like a Photoshop filter. I know that's not exactly fair, but I never was really impressed. But when you with the aging, especially with her in bed in the last scene, there were like in 2008. And sometimes even today, there are people who didn't even know that was Cate Blanchett. They're just like, "Oh wow, who is that great actress that you got to play Daisy in the hospital scenes?" And I just hey, to each his own. But I think that's crazy talk.
I do. I have to be on Team Tristan on that one. Just in terms of Cate Blanchett in the hospital bed, I thought that the makeup on her was stunning. Like it rises to the level of, I never realized Max von Sydow wasn't that age in The Exorcist until he was like 20 years later, and I was like, wow, that guy didn't like age since the 70s. And somebody was like, he was young back then. Oh, okay. Just because the makeup was so good, it was so well suited to his face, and I think with Cate Blanchett, it's the same sort of thing where the makeup job that they do is so well suited to her that I buy that as that's what Cate Blanchett is going to look like when she's 95 years old in her hospital bed. I'm like, yeah, that's what she's going to look like. Which is not a knock. I'm just saying like that. It just looks completely natural. Yeah. In terms of the digital effects, from my standpoint, I don't have any qualm with being ahead of the curve. And I think that the effects are perfectly fine. I think that they aged, as well as they needed to, sort of thing. Like it's one of those things where if I see anything that's not blending quite right, sometimes it's going to be some of the digital backgrounds. Like when he goes to New York, there's just this weird sort of thing that happens where they put the edges seem too soft on some of the digital backgrounds, and I can accept it as a stylistic thing and overlook it, but it's a consistent thing with a lot of movies that try to recreate old-timey New York or going out to sea when Louisville wasn't built up or New Orleans was still young or something like that, where there's this softness to it that makes it look like a photograph that's lost some of its edge,
Moulin
but
Rouge.
It doesn't work. Right, but Moulin Rouge was a stylistic choice versus this is everything's supposed to be real and real. And so the incongruity jumps out a little bit more. Like with Moulin Rouge, I especially think of when they have those tracking shots that go through the city in the beginning. It all looks like animation plates, and that's on purpose. It gives it that weird sense of depth.
I mainly meant like inadvertently, like Moulin Rouge.
Oh, I got you.
Where Moulin Rouge was on point, like that's what they were going for. Sometimes when you have a soft backdrop or it's not sharp enough or there's not enough detail, it can give that little animated, ethereal look. And you can kind of will it away by saying, oh, it's a stylistic choice, or, they put their special effects budget in other places.
It still looks good though. I also, like you said, Brandon, I completely acknowledge the giant leap here. This is the moment where you didn't need to double or triple cast somebody for a lifetime role, where it was completely feasible to have somebody go from their absolute youth to older age and I can see this as a pivot point that eventually gets us to that moment that when I first saw it in the theater sort of took my breath away in Captain America Civil War, when they had the young Robert Downey Jr. walking around in the recreated area, because I grew up watching the younger Robert Downey Jr. and it completely fooled me for a second, because whoever they got as the body double or whatever was built and moved like him. And so I think this is that point where it suddenly leaps forward and makes those sorts of things possible. So I can respect it, 100% of the time. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And this technology comes to its peak in that opening sequence of Terminator Genesis when we get the young Arnold again.
The funny thing is, I haven't seen. Oh no, Genesis! I saw. I thought you meant Dark Fate. Yeah.
So one thing that you said though, it really threw me off in this, and I don't know if I noticed it more because again, going into this movie and popping it in, I'm like, oh dear Lord, here we go. Right? I might have been a little bit pickier at the beginning, but I noticed it with Cate Blanchett's character when she was young, that they used Cate Blanchett's voice altered for young Cate Blanchett, and I didn't notice it as much for Brad Pitt's character young at the end of the movie. Now, maybe because I was more into the movie by the end of it, but it really threw me off at the beginning of the movie hearing, like, I don't know if she was just faking her voice as younger or if they digitally changed it a little bit, but it made me think of like the Bewitching Pool from the original Twilight Zone when they got the woman who did the Rocky and Bullwinkle voice of Rocky, and they put her voice over the girl from To Kill a Mockingbird, and I'm like, it just didn't fit, and it really took me out. What do you guys think of that?
It didn't take me out. I think probably with something like that, there's a certain part where it registers with me, and then I think even more so than the digital stuff, the visual digital stuff, I just understand that there's going to be a limitation, if you will, and so I hear it and I just throw it in the back of my brain, and it's like, okay, that's just what her voice is supposed to be, sort of thing.
I'm kind of with you, John, where I noticed it immediately, where I'm just like, oh, they're looping Cate Blanchett's voice. Oh, okay, that's a decision, and then I move on. I'm just it
Right.
doesn't bother me, but it did.
Did they do it with Brad Pitt?
No, they didn't.
Okay.
When he's a kid, when he pops up again at the end of the movie, and he's getting dementia, that's not Brad Pitt's voice.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But yeah, she Cate Blanchett's voice was used for 5-year-old Daisy and 12-year-old Daisy, something like that. But no, Brad Pitt was just they did do digital effects for kind of like making her younger sounding, and they also did digital effects with Brad Pitt's voice with young Benjamin Button when he's just like that kind of voice, that gravelly thing.
In terms of the sound, the place where I think it really there's an odd sort of. I thought that this could just be because I was watching it watching the streaming version, and one of the things that struck me was some of the sound mixing was not as on point as I would have expected from Fincher. There was a certain imbalance. I don't know if it's just because of the system that I was on, or because I'm just watching it through a TV and it's an old TV, so maybe it's that. But it just seemed like the mixing was a little bit off. Like the lows were too low, and then there were certain sounds, and this was consistent throughout the movie, where some of the thumps and the walking sounds were a little bit too pronounced, especially when they were like on the deck of the boat. When he was on the tugboat and stuff like that. It could just be deficiencies with watching it, digital version.
I was paying attention to that too. I have a pretty good system, and I think the only thing that I noticed was that the rear effects were a little hot, but other than that, it was okay.
Mm-hmm. I didn't notice anything myself. I didn't. There was nothing that stood out to me. So
it's probably just the digital version then, like a deficiency in that, because you have to worry about bitrate and bandwidth and blah 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 and all that stuff.
Now, John, I want to sidestep a little bit. You mentioned earlier about how it was commonplace for an actor to or for a role like this where you're going through in somebody's entire lifespan for it to be played by multiple actors. And
Reasonably.
yeah. And this movie has been in development for a very, very long time. And it was in serious development ever since 1994.
Wow.
And like tons of different people were attached to it. Like one time, like Jack Nicholson was attached to it even before the 90s.
Yikes.
And then Steven Spielberg was attached to it. Then Tom Cruise was attached to it. John Travolta was attached to it. And the big problem is that no actor wanted to agree to lead a film that they were only going to be in for a third of the time. Because if you have a kid version,
right,
then you have the adult, and then you have the old man. And it wasn't until they were just like, oh, we could do this digitally, and maybe we could make this, maybe we can push the boundaries on this and actually make it worthwhile, until Fincher came along and said, yeah, let's do this.
That's very cool. I didn't know that about the development. And if it had been in development since 94, that gives me additional reason to just go ahead and share one of my hot takes with it. The phrase that popped along in my brain during this rewatch was Fincher does Forrest Gump.
Yes. Honestly, that went through my head as well. Not only Forrest Gump, but Big Fish.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I didn't like it at first. The first time that I saw it is because by this point, Fincher had settled himself into a type of genre, right? And this kind of, he's breaking the mold with this movie, and he's doing something completely different than he's done before. Now, this time around, watching it again, I thought, like, why didn't I have a problem with Big Fish? Because I was a huge Tim Burton fan, and when Big Fish came out, I loved it right from the beginning. And Big Fish is not a Tim Burton movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why it hit me so hard for Fincher. But yeah, I exactly had those thoughts. Big Fish and Forrest Gump totally came into my mind as I was watching this movie.
Well, you guys know who wrote this, right?
No.
Eric Roth.
Not. Okay.
And Eric Roth wrote Forrest Gump.
There you go. That makes perfect sense then. That makes absolute perfect. But to speak to Brandon's point, maybe that's why the style does seem like this seems like an odd choice of project for Fincher in those terms. It feels, in a sense, like we have Panic Room, where it's his, Can't Talk Coming Down sort of relaxation flick, which wasn't very relaxed, but he's trying out all of this stuff that's just completely technically insane. And then I think we get back to some more of his roots with Zodiac. And then we come back here, and I think that my impression winds up being something of material that isn't 100% his flair, but he's completely committed to doing it in the best way possible. Like this type of project, in terms of feel, in terms of the touchy-feely aspects of it, does seem more suited to a Zemeckis, right? And that's why Forrest Gump works so well, is you need somebody that can tap into that really sometimes schmaltzy, emotional aspect of things that gets you all blubbery at the end of the movie because it's so beautiful and you can't believe it, and right, oh wow, this is great and this is a cultural phenomenon thing, versus something that is intricately and exhaustively technical. And I think that what I end up with on this rewatch is a sense of a director who is, once again, and I'm sticking with this, betraying that he has more of a soft side than people give him credit for. But this is not his typical method. This type of script isn't his typical method of communication. Does that make sense at all?
There's a lot of theories that have gone around with why why did Fincher accept this picture? Why did he accept this script? Why did he want to do this? And he developed this at the same exact time as Zodiac. He was doing it not back to back, but at the same time, parallel. And Zodiac just happened to come to fruition first. It came before the camera first. And so there was a solid chance that Benjamin Button could have been first in 2006, and then we would have gotten Zodiac in 2008. And a lot of people, I think the predominant theory is that Fincher's father died. And soon after that, that's when he agreed to make The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And it was something where it was, it's post-7, post-game, post-Fight Club, post-Panic Room. And it was, people think that he wanted to explore something. He wanted to explore something on a much deeper emotional level. And it's, we'll never know. We'll never know his true motivations, but it just happened to coincide with his father's death. And we see an aging filmmaker. We see someone who is reaching maturity in his craft, as well as his own life. And I think that's got to influence you on how you choose your projects.
Of course it does. There's no way an artist isn't influenced by what they're going through, emotionally or intellectually. And the thing is, I know that it sounds like I'm sort of, stomping on the movie, and I'm not. This is still a successful emotional piece. This is still something where I feel something when I watch it. I think that the biggest hurdle that this film has in terms of it is again intricately technical, and the technical stuff sort of overtakes a lot of the emotional establishment in the first hour of the film. And you spend, at least I do, I spend the first 45 to 60 minutes marveling at everything that's going on, saying, wow, look at what he did with, look what he did with, that's amazing. Oh, that's so cool. And then it's not until there's, I'd say probably the turning point is about the point where the tugboat crew gets slaughtered in the war, that suddenly it seems to find an emotional footing. And I think maybe that speaks to what you're talking about, Tristan, where he took it on possibly to exercise some of that feeling about his father dying, because that moment where the steamboat captain dies is, I think, the spark where this movie comes alive, where it suddenly doesn't find, but it states its purpose. It declares this whole thing is about how fleeting and precious life is and how unpredictably sad it can be. And it still has that Forrest Gump moment of the hummingbird farther out to sea than ever, sort of like Jenny's birds flying up when Forrest says the prayer at the tree at her grave. And then we start to establish a relationship with Cate Blanchett's character, and I think that's really where everything starts to come to life with this film. And so I think it's just one of those things where I think probably in that first hour, it's feeling like Fincher is trying to just get to that moment. And then as soon as he finds that emotional stride, it's like, okay, this is the film that we want to make.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that first hour though is kind of necessary to submerge yourself in the film, because while you're spending so much time at the beginning marveling at what he's done, by the time that comes around, you're over the awe of what you're seeing. Because even still, yes, old young Brad Pitt looks a little bit CG, it's still pretty amazing what I'm watching on screen, even in 2020, right? And all the grand vistas of the backgrounds and stuff that you were talking about earlier. I didn't see the digital that you were talking about. I didn't notice it. I don't know, maybe I was just too captivated at the time. But I think that the marvel of what he's doing on the screen, you need a little bit of time to process it, because there's so much groundbreaking special effects going on at this time. But yeah, I agree with you with where it hits its beat is definitely right at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have to establish a premise, and most of the time, if you establish your premise, you're just like, okay, you set up the rules, you move forward, you have you introduce the drama, you introduce the conflict, and then you move on from that. But with this one, introducing, you can't do that in 15 minutes. you have to
Sure.
spread it out. Like you have to you can't just go like, oh, he was born old and now he's not so old. Like you have to show
sure.
that progression. And we're not, I mean, we're not coming down on you, John. We know that's not what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
But we agree with you that, or at least I do, that emotional point definitely does come later. But to go on to Brandon's point, you need to build it. And actually, one problem that a lot of people had when this came out, because when this came out, it was not universally beloved. Like the movie itself was not universally beloved. I mean, it was definitely a technical achievement, and people were really in awe of that. But in terms of the story, a lot of people were like, "There's no conflict here. There's no conflict," and it's not. I know that every movie needs to have a conflict, and I think that to say that there's no conflict is a complete oversimplification. But it's not a straightforward, here's your protagonist, here's his problem, and now he needs to overcome it. It's an exploration of a man's life when it's thrown out of balance and backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And the thing is, it's like, I don't know. It would be very easy to take my comment to mean, oh, it should be fat. I don't know how you could possibly construct this film any other way than it is.
Yeah.
I think that it's just a byproduct of the type of material. And I think that it's also possible, as crazy as this might sound, is that moment where the captain dies is so powerful and so affecting that it diminishes the journey up to it. I'm not trying to overstate it, but it's one of those things where it's almost like jump-starting a car, where it's like spark, spark, spark. Now the engine's going, sort of thing. You needed to pull the wires out. You needed to spark everything. You needed to tie everything off. But until that fired up and the car started going, it was all labor as opposed to love, I guess. It's just what I'm saying. So, but in terms of the emotional connection, I'll throw this to you first, Brandon, but like, do you think that it sustains that emotional connection from that point forward, or do you feel that it wanes and waxes as it goes on toward the end?
I had a hardcore 180 on this film watching it this time, and it really, really hit on a level with me. I don't know if it's because I had seen it before, and so I kind of knew what I was expecting and was able to look at it differently, or if maybe it's because I'm 10 or 11 years older than the last time I've seen it, and I've experienced my life a little bit more. I've had 3 daughters in the meantime. When this came out, I'd been only married for 2 years. Now I've been married for 12 years, right? So, but I think it sustains it for the remainder of the film, and I believe that it grows because there's so many beautiful moments that happen through this character's life and what he's experiencing all the way up until his death that are so beautiful and so fascinating to watch, that this emotional level is just growing and growing and growing for me the whole time that I'm watching this movie.
What about you, Tristan?
I think it does. I think plain and simple it does. I think it's a build that hits a peak. Let me rephrase that. Not a peak, but it hits you hard with what you're talking about, like during the war scene. Like it establishes that, life is precious and we have to let go. And Benjamin even restates what the captain says in his final words when we see Benjamin's father die. And like you can be as mad as a mad dog at the way things went. You could swear, curse the fates, but when it comes to the end, you have to let go. Like you said, I feel like that's the message of it. And so we continually see that repeated where, like you have a big set piece with the war scene, and it ends emotionally. We don't have that much action again, or that peak release with the accompanying feelings of letting go, but we do have that we do have those emotional punches, when we're in Paris, or when he gets rejected for the first time by but no, when he rejects Daisy, and then when she rejects him in New York, and we kind of go back and forth between the two of them. And so I feel more and more emotional wrap up post the war scene. So to answer your question, yes, like I feel like it sustains that emotionality. It sustains that connection with the characters until the very last moment of the film into the credits.
So in terms of emotionality, though, and you talk about the rejection and then the other rejection, I trust I'm not the only guy that can relate with when he goes to New York with the flowers. It doesn't go quite the way he'd planned. Just going to say, if anybody's wondering, that's a very relatable moment. No, I'm happy for you. Please have a fun night. I just came up here on a lark. No big deal. No big deal. Yeah, and I got
a question for you, just based on something you were saying there, Tristan. I wonder if what we're seeing, where this peak happens with the war, and there isn't really a dramatic event like that throughout the remainder of the film. This kind of came to me as we're talking about this here. What if like that's the climax of the movie, but like almost like the movie should be reviewed in reverse order as well? And I realized that previous 45 minutes would be like a long denouement, right? But it's like, with his life aging in the wrong order, I wonder if we could like maybe analyze it the other way. Maybe I'm just looking for something weird here. I don't know.
No, that's interesting. I think that's really interesting, and I think it definitely could play in terms of like, life is lived forward but understood backward, sort of thing. I think there's a level to that. I think that's sort of like a valid, interesting way to look at it. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, Tristan. He asked you the question, and I just jumped in. So
I don't know if I can confirm that right away. My gut instinct is no, but I don't want to be dismissive. I think the main thing with me is like it's a unique structure of you establish the premise of Benjamin Button. That's your first part of the film. And then you have, okay, he leaves the nest and he needs to find himself. And so in that second part, like he finds himself, he's like he falls in love for the first time, or I should say like somebody else loves him for the first time. It's his first non-adolescent relationship. And it's so like he becomes a man in multiple ways, with love, with finding a father figure, and with experiencing loss for the first time. And then when he comes back home, when he does find himself and he knows who he is, he's like, I'm Benjamin. I accept who I am. I accept how I'm aging, and I accept my lot in life. And then the movie's all about him and Daisy. Yeah, him and Daisy are introduced early on, and we see some montages here and there about like exchanging letters, but the movie's not really about them until the last part of the film. And I think that's how I see the structure. It's introduction, finding out who you are, and then finding that person that you want to spend the rest of your life with.
Yeah. Speaking of the relationship with Daisy, just because it's I want to be very clear, this is not something that I subscribe to. But there is an aspect of his early flirtations with Daisy that I wonder if people could misinterpret as well, because of the appearance of it. Because of the appearance of this older man waking her up in the middle of the night and saying, let's sneak out, keep it a secret, I want to show you something. Do you think that there's any sort of present day read that could be added over this that would make this film uncomfortable? Or do you think that it adequately dodges those sorts of, because, everybody loves to take something that's a present day conception and apply it backwards to films. Do you think that part of this film is going to age poorly in relation to the rest of it?
I don't think so, because we get so much of Benjamin's experience from his point of view, and they address his interactions enough in a childlike manner and they deal with it enough in the movie. Like Daisy's grandmother like basically says, "Shame on you," right? So we know that the characters around there can see it that way, but because we're watching it all through Benjamin's point of view, we don't get that read. We know where his heart is. We know what he's doing. We know who he is.
And then we have Queenie come in immediately afterwards to reestablish that premise by saying people just don't understand. People don't understand who you are or what you're going through. And so it forces the audience to... I think Fincher does a great job of forcing the audience to remember he's not an old man. He's a kid.
Right.
You're looking at a kid. And I feel like if you didn't have as deft of a hand as Fincher with this type of material, I think that's a huge possibility that could have been read differently today. But thankfully, we did have a master at work specifically with that kind of storytelling.
Yeah, and I think actually the moment that really drove it home for me, like I think that really it sort of like just hits the nail on the head in terms of reestablishing permanently his actual internal age versus his external appearance is, if anything, when he comes home and he throws up on the stairs and he's busted like a teenager who snuck in from going out to the wrong place. That scene is played so perfectly that I looked at that as I never threw up in front of my mom, but I had experiences kind of like that where I wasn't doing nothing.
I love that reaction because she asks him, she goes, "Where were you?" And he goes, "Nothing."
Yes.
It's so perfect.
Yeah. I do also find it interesting because this is a film that goes through the march of time. And I do find it interesting because a lot of films now, I think, would not even venture to the idea of what was considered a time-honored tradition of taking the young man to the house of prostitution to deflower him. Like that, we've all heard so many stories from like history, and even Sam Peckinpah's life was about his uncle took him to a whorehouse to turn him into a man and stuff like that. But I don't think even today, this relatively brief span later, you would see as much of a romanticism with that time in his life, because it shows him enjoying it and very happy with it. I think that that's very interesting, because I think that today's movies would treat it more as he would be filled with regret afterward and have some sort of lesson about how wrong it was, sort of thing. Whereas this is more appropriate to the time period, which is, yeah, that happened and I'm happy about it, sort of thing.
Yeah, like he even reiterates, like Tilda Swinton's character says, like, "You haven't been with a lot of women, have you?" And he's like, "Well, never on Sundays."
Yes. Right.
Now, speaking of time period, it's really interesting with this movie. There's a lot of external factors that have changed this movie. I know that's a simplistic thing to say, but this movie was originally going to be set in Baltimore because that's where the short story was originally set. But the reason why it was set in Louisiana was to take advantage of the post-Katrina filming credits that were taking place. Like, Louisiana was just like, "Please come film here, spend your money." And so they're like, "Okay, well, we'll rework the script into to make it set in New Orleans." And can you imagine this movie at any other location than New Orleans? It's insane how hard they integrated it into the storyline. I mean, they literally integrated Katrina into the storyline. And not only that with setting, but with time period. This was originally supposed to be, Benjamin wasn't supposed to be born at the end of the Great War. He was supposed to be born at the end of the Civil War, and it was supposed to go up to the Jazz Age. But they changed it to the Great War to the 60s because the studio was just like, "Yeah, do that so we can throw in some Beatles references so the boomers will feel like they can relate to it more, so that they can get that generation." And I think all of that was such a genius decision, and it created such a great tone that I feel I can't even imagine what it would be like if it was the original idea.
Well, I the thing is, any chance to kick Baltimore is a great one for me. And I can say if this were set in Baltimore, it would lose a star immediately because that place sucks. I grew up in Maryland, and I'm allowed to say it, okay? I spent a lot of time in Baltimore, and that town is awful. Sorry.
I was
Just had
going
to
to
get
ask
out of
you
my
guys,
system.
as a Canadian, like, why do you think Katrina was such a major event in this movie? Because living in Canada, I know that it happened.
Oh,
right. But it being landlocked in Saskatchewan, it didn't affect me at all. Like,
Katrina became a cultural event here with good reason, because there were so many things that were highlighted from decades of the Corps of Engineers ignoring a problem, which led to tragedy, which led to some botched responses and the perception of even more botched. Like, there were so many things at play that happened with Katrina in American society that made it even more impactful than your typical hurricane. I mean, there are bigger hurricanes and bigger hurricane-related tragedies that have happened in the history of the United States. But Katrina in specific, especially because there was a certain racial component with the city where it happened, just sort of left a very strong psychological scar on American society. But I think that's really interesting because I think your comment, Brandon, is really illuminating to the fact that for an American audience, we consider it just a given how apparent why Katrina would be a thing in this and why it would be so relatable. And that, I think, could even play into that perception that American audiences have sometimes of, what, you don't understand why this is so important to us?
Yeah.
And like that sort of thing where we consider American culture and American cultural events are universal, aren't they? And so that's a really interesting take. I hadn't heard that before, but that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. It became an emotional scar in our country's consciousness. I mean, like John said, like there were larger hurricanes, there were more destructive hurricanes, but so much went wrong with Katrina. There was so much human error and so many bad decisions made in the local government and the federal government, in the executive branch, with engineers. It was just a bad situation. And it became a cultural touchstone. And when you're dealing with, when you're setting a movie in New Orleans and you're showing a man who, like, you're showing his entire life and you show certain touchstones throughout that life. I mean, I hate to go back to Forrest Gump, but you got to think about Forrest Gump. Like, in order to help log away time, like they showed certain events. Now, they didn't do that so much with Benjamin Button. They didn't really say like, oh, and like, and then this happened. And then, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, like we didn't do any of that, but there was, because it was such a New Orleans story and you saw so much and New Orleans is such an old city. If you're going to show it in semi-present day, why not use a large recent cultural touchstone? And so that's why I think they integrated into it.
Yeah, I think that there's also a very interesting thing, because I think that Baltimore is a city that has had a lot of racial history all of the U.S. has really, but like Louisiana and New Orleans in specific, even if you remove the Katrina aspect to it, I think that there's such an interesting dimension here of the idea that Benjamin is rejected by his father, who's in upper crust white society, and taken in and cared for by the working class African American society, as it were. I think that there is a resonance there as well, in the sense that there is a disconnect sometimes of the symbiosis between the aspects of American culture, and that I think that Benjamin, in and of himself and the way his life is structured within this film, addresses that sort of thing where it's like real life on the ground is that everybody, is a member of this melting pot, and it's our own perceived differences that, separate us and those sorts of things. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know, but that was sort of one of the things that I walked away with this time.
No, I'm glad that you were able to provide a little bit of that clarity, because I knew it was a big event, but I didn't always know why it was such a big event for the States, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, hey, absolutely. And the thing is, like I said, it's really, I think it's really interesting because I had never. It is one of those things where I don't think it would have occurred to anybody that it wouldn't be immediately apparent why it would be obvious to set it, during Katrina and stuff like that. I definitely think it's a very interesting aspect to it, especially as somebody who now lives in a hurricane zone. I can tell you don't hear thunder like that too much because there's a moment where the daughter is standing at the window and there's like this big clap of thunder and it's like, no, it's really deafening wind, and they get you in the basement as quickly as possible if basements are an option. And if not, you hide in a closet. But that's just the way it works in hurricane territory. But we've talked about things that worked and haven't worked. Is there anything that either of you would consider excisable from this story? Is there anything that is unnecessary that Fincher should have reconsidered holding on to? Is there anything that he could have cut for the sake of runtime or connectivity that could have worked better for you?
Just the voice. Just her voice, that's all.
Okay,
Baby
fair enough.
Voice.
Fair enough.
This is, I was sort of thinking the other day, because I was asking myself that exact question, because I was trying to rate it. And I was like, how high do I go with this rating? Because I enjoyed it so much. And then one thing I'm like, okay, well, a good question to ask is, what would you change? Is there something that you could change and make it a better movie? If you can make it a better movie by adding something simple or taking something away, then you should rate accordingly. I can't think of changing a single thing with this movie. And I have plenty of 5-star films that I love and adore, and there's something that I can change. There's something that I can find where I'm just like, that needs to change, or that can go, and it's still a 5-star movie, or it would just be a little bit better. But and even with Fincher films, but with Curious Case of Benjamin Button, there's not a single thing I would change, and that is so rare. That is absolutely rare.
Brandon, how about you?
Like I said, just the voice. Honestly, I would change nothing else, honestly. It's just that voice threw me out right at the beginning. But other than that, I think the story is perfect. I think the tale that's told is just perfect the way that it is.
John, what about you?
Well, I fall a little differently, I guess, is that I agree with the statement, and this is what's going to make very little sense, and you'll probably, get mad at me the way you did with Panic Room or something like that. But this is one of those ones where... Yeah, I think that there's a ceiling on it. I think that this is as excellent a film as it can be. I don't think that you could make this film better than it is. But I don't think that at its core, it hits that connection level that I need in order to give it that perfect blessing sort of thing. It's one of those things where, can I put into words what I think is quote unquote wrong? No. But I can say that as a whole, it doesn't connect with me as deeply this time. I don't know whether it's the mood that I'm in. I don't know what's going on. But the first time I saw this film, cried like a baby at the end. I came out, I was like, I can't believe I didn't get to see this in the theater. Oh my gosh, this is so gorgeous. I love every second of it. And the ending still packs punch, and I still think once it hits that emotional beat, it just takes off. But it's just somehow limited for me. I don't know whether it's that I never really buy into Pitt's vocal characterizations. I don't know whether it's that I have so much trouble connecting with it in that first hour. But I love it. I think it's great, but I don't think it's perfect. And I don't think it can be necessarily.
I have a question to ask you guys. This is something that plagues me with the movie. It's not the movie. I'm fine with how this goes in the movie, but from a personal choice, from a character choice, from a father choice. I want to ask you guys, because we're all fathers, and oddly enough, we're all fathers of just girls. And one thing that really bothers me about this movie, and again, I'm not saying that it should be different, but every single time I watch this movie, I'm just like, maybe it'll be different this time. Maybe he won't do that. Is he leaves. I want to know what you guys think about that, because I scream at the screen every single time he leaves, because when he comes back and she's 12 or something like that, he's young. He's a young man. He's young. He's young. He looks like he's 20 or something like that. And maybe in his 20s. And maybe I'm getting the math wrong, but he's young, but he's not a baby. He's not 12-year-old. He's not the same age as his daughter. And when I see that, I'm just like, you easily could have sent her off to college. You easily could have sent her to adulthood and then done whatever the hell you wanted to do. You left your baby girl. You left the love of your life. And it pains me to my core every single time I watch this movie. And I want to know what you guys think.
I'll go ahead and jump in, and I'll say maybe you just put your finger on why I can't emotionally connect with this, is because, to flip it and to go back to the Forrest Gump thing, the moment that gets me 100% of the time with Forrest Gump, I could watch the whole thing and just like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. But that moment at the end where his son turns around and says, "I love you, Dad," like, I'm done. I'm absolutely finished. And so, yes, I think that might be it, is that I have a wall that goes up with any character that I view as being excessively selfish. And maybe that's just a statement to how successful the characterization is. But especially in terms of parenthood, I cannot, I'm just not down with that.
But they're not portraying it as selfishness.
Yeah, that's fine. They don't have to. If I walk away with that read, that's what I walked away with. You know, like I can stand in judgment of a character's decisions regardless of how the movie feels about it, right?
Well, I completely understand and respect that, but why do you think he's being selfish and not? Because I feel like they definitely hit you over the head with, oh, I'm doing this for her. Like I don't, you can't be raising two kids, and I want her to have a real father. It's not about me. And then even when he comes back, she says, "Oh, you did the right thing by leaving," and everything like that. I feel like they went out of their way to show that it wasn't a selfish act. So why do you personally read it as being selfishness? And I'm not challenging you here. I genuinely want to know.
Yeah. That's where I'm stuck, because that might then speak to my earlier criticism of the fact that, like, this is as good as it can be. But because of that moment, even if I can't really put words into it, like I guess it would be if I see something where, even if I can't, like, if you gave me 10 years, I could probably figure out how could I make it so that this goes a little bit differently and I'm more comfortable with it. Maybe that becomes the key to me liking it more. But in terms of how it stands now, that's just how it is, I guess. It becomes a sort of thing of, and maybe it's a wrong read. Maybe I'm misreading. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I think that there's sort of like an emotional aspect of, if you're doing it for your well-being, then it's still, even if it winds up being the best decision, your intentions matter. So I guess you could say, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, your intentions matter. And so you can have a good result from an evil act and an evil result from a good act and that sort of thing. But it's your intention, what you seek out to accomplish. And so maybe I'm just reading that scene as too selfish on his part. Maybe that's a shortcoming with me. I don't know.
Brandon, what do you think?
I struggled with this when I watched it this time, because I've now got 3 daughters of my own. You know, whether daughters or sons, I don't think makes a difference. It's just that I think he had to leave at some point, right? And while I agree with you, he could have stayed with her longer, I think by the time he came back to the dance hall, he would have been too young to be the dad. And for him to leave when she's older, there is that bond that's been attached that has to be broken, and that's going to crush a child's heart. And it's going to make that child probably hate her father for leaving at an age when she's fallen in love with her father. So while I struggle, because it's like, yes, he's got a lot of his life left, leaving at that time means that daughter doesn't have to have that pain later on in her life that he knows she's going to end up having. So I can see both sides of the argument.
But isn't he making, in a sense, a decision sort of like his own dad did, where this would be difficult for me, and therefore I'll leave? Do you see any aspect of that?
His father, I don't think, is the same thing. His father did something selfish and angry when he got rid of Benjamin the baby.
Oh, sure.
Because his wife had just died, and when he sees this bundle of joy that he wants, and he opens it up to this monster, he's not going to be able to love that monster for killing his wife. And so he does something selfish by getting rid of baby Benjamin at that time.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't kill the baby, but he does give it up. And that's not what Benjamin did later on in life. He didn't, I don't see the selfish attitude there for what he did.
Okay. No, I mean, that's fair enough. Like I said, maybe there's just something weird I'm bringing to the scene. I don't know. So, we've talked about things back and forth. Does anybody have anything else they want to, bring to the floor here?
Yeah, I do. There's one thing I want to talk about. I don't know if this is like just way on the head, but I really love how this movie starts and finishes, and how it makes me think of the aging process in general, and how babies are so similar to the elderly, yet our society doesn't take care of them in the same way. And it's kind of fascinating because, like, even in different times, in different eras, like if we look at how the older people are taken care of at the start of the movie in this house, this giant house, this loving house, lots of people, lots of things going on, to Daisy in her old age dying alone in a room. Yes, her daughter is there, but, doctors are just coming in. There's no love in that room, where we'd seen all these older people with so much love with each other. The grandkids were coming to visit, right? Young people were coming to visit, filling those houses with joy. But seeing as well how Benjamin as a young person is treated differently than the older people in that house as well, I'm kind of being vague here, but it just makes me think of how our society treats the elderly as opposed to how our society treats the young.
Well, I think that also has a lot to do with family issues, I guess you could say, because the thing is, like, if you look back at they're essentially living in a home. The elderly people in the beginning of the film, they're essentially living in a home. Mm-hmm. And we have institutionalized that into the nursing home, which doesn't have that personal touch. It does feel like a hospital where everybody has their own individual room. I live in Florida, which is the land of assisted living. And I've seen all shades, all shapes and sizes of it. And you have experiences across the board. But yes, Daisy as an older woman dying in that sterile environment, one family member around, storm raging outside, ultimately alone, versus the idea of, you've lived a really long and fruitful life. We're going to put you somewhere where you can live. You're going to stay in this house. You're going to be there, and your family isn't necessarily around, but you form a new type of family. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe there's an aspect of that goes on. I think that there's also I think we've seen, and this is me just sort of like pontificating at this point, I know, but like, I think that there's also a pivot point where it used to be generational in terms of people living under a roof. But then there's a romanticizing of the idea of striking out on your own and never coming back. Like, if you look at, and as much as people might want to, lay cultural, hindsight on stuff or anything, but the whole point in, say, Wizard of Oz is to come back home and realize your family, your home, this is where you belong. This This is what makes the world work. George Bailey finds out he's part of the community that he's around, and these are the people that love him. It doesn't matter whether he's rich and successful. It matters that he's made an impact and he's surrounded by people who love him, versus the idea of individual success now being sort of, emphasized. And so as a result, you see sort of a splintering so that people do wind up alone, and there isn't as much care for people as there should be.
I didn't really read into that theme too terribly much beyond the simple line that that Daisy said, we all end up in diapers. I feel like that was a concise way to kind of show the sunrise, sunset of it all, like the double-edged sword, the double-sided coin, where it is fascinating when you look at Benjamin's life from beginning to end. So much of it is similar at the top and tail. Obviously you're not born with arthritis, and you don't, and you're in like a child is not supposed to have dementia, but there are certain things that, get swapped back and forth where, like when Daisy was just like, I'm Daisy, can you say Daisy? Like, you do that with a child, but I remember doing that with my grandmother, towards the end, saying like, I'm Tristan, I'm your grandson. Can you say my name? And I think that in itself is a great thing with this movie. But I didn't really see the emphasis on, we don't take care of the elderly today. Like I'm not arguing with you guys, but I didn't really see that as a prominent theme in the film, other than the similarities between the beginning and end of life.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a prominent theme, but I think it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's there just by virtue of how it is different. I mean, look at all of the people that, I already said my piece, but, just like all the people that Benjamin is surrounded by at the beginning, and the way that he sees they interact and everything, versus the singular room. So, but, as one last question, actually, Brandon is our resident music scholar and obsessive. What did you think of the score for this film?
I thought it was really beautiful. I didn't pay attention as to who did the score this time. Can you tell me that?
Desplat.
Alexander Desplat.
Yeah, I thought the music was really beautiful. It's not been my favorite Fincher score so far, and it's not going to be my favorite Fincher score ever. That's still coming up in a couple of movies. But I thought it was perfect. I thought it totally fit the style of the film, and it was perfect. Nothing felt out of place.
Cool. But any notes about the music from you, Tristan?
No, not really. I think it was. I think Desplat was a perfect choice for this kind of tone, and I feel like he very much sets the tone. It was not very in your face. It was not. He did not make himself known a great deal, but it was something that was relaxing while at the same time heartwarming.
So we've had a great time discussing The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, been there and back again, and so we'll come to our final ratings and reviews. Brandon, where do you fall with this?
So I love this movie a lot, and as I said earlier, I had a complete 180 on this. And this is not my favorite Fincher film, and I would definitely put this at the lower tier of his films because it's so different from the rest of his works. But I'm still going to give this a 5-star film, and as we've gone along, I mean, like, except for the theatrical cut of Alien 3, I've given everything 5 stars. And this was the only film of his prior to this podcast that I didn't give 5 stars to. And
wow.
I'm really grateful that we've come to this film again. I'm really grateful that I had an opportunity to revisit this, because I don't know when I would have revisited this film if not for this podcast. I don't frequently find a director or whatever and be like, let's rewatch everything again. Like, because I'm so busy in my life, I need a reason. And this podcast gave me a reason, and I'm really I'm very thrilled that I had such a turnaround on this movie, because it was truly a joy to watch, and I love it.
Excellent. Tristan, where do you end up?
When I went back to Letterboxd, I saw that I ranked this as 4.5 stars. And after watching it just a couple of days ago, I have bumped it up to 5 stars. Not to sound like Brandon, where I'm just giving out 5 stars. But
I just give up 5 stars left. I'm like Oprah. 5 stars for you and 5 stars for you.
But this movie is, as I've stated earlier, I wouldn't change a thing. I think this movie is so well structured, so well acted, edited, the color palette, the music, the direction, the production design. It's so great. This is such a fantastic movie. This is a 5-star movie, in my opinion. And in his 10 movies, this is right in the middle of my ranking. But in what we've seen so far, this is just below Fight Club for me. And Fight Club is my top. This one is, even though like I love Seven to my bones, and like Zodiac is great, and Alien 3 I have an unhealthy obsession with, and Panic Group is fun. It's just Curious Case of Benjamin Button has such a unique and almost tangible emotional connection with me. This is a special movie.
I'm at in my less generous moments a solid 4, but for the simple technical achievements in this film, it deserves an extra half star. So I'm at 4.5 with this. And I know that some people might scratch their heads and say, but based on what you said, how did you get to 4.5? Because it's solid 4 at its core, and then just Fincher ups it to a half. I think that a less competent director, then this is a 3.5 or 4. But Fincher gooses it, gets every last drop of what he can out of this, and so I come in at a 4.5.
See, the one reason why I really love this segment on every single episode that we do is, I mean, because we're doing a Fincher podcast, and he's made 10 fantastic films. Like, it's not so much like, oh, well, they're going to rank it a 4 or 5. You know, like, what's the mystery? What's the surprise? It's not so much what we rank it. It's or what we rate it. It's why we rate it the way that we do, that I find really, really interesting. Because, like, the reason why I rate at 5 is completely different from why Brandon rates at 5, and is totally opposite of why you rate it 4.5. You know, it's I find that fascinating, and hopefully the listeners do as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I agree. I think it is a great deal of fun, to go through and see what everybody thinks. And Brandon, if people want to talk to you about what you think, where can they find you?
Well, I mean, I rated 5 because I don't know what else to give anything. I mean, I gave Ernest Goes to Camp 5 stars, right? So you can find me on Twitter at Brandon Matella. You can find me over on Trek FM with a show called The Line, which is all about Star Trek Picard. You can find me on the United Federation of Podcasts with a podcast called Franchise Fatigue, and that's all about movies, remakes, and sequels. And last but not least, over on the Fandom Podcast Network, I have a show called Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast, where we go through Hitch's films one at a time in chronological order, very similar to what we're doing here on House of Fincher.
Very cool. Tristan, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at The Insane Robin. You can also find me on thenerdparty.com, where I have 2 archive shows, one about Star Trek called Punch It! Writing in Star Trek, and one that is a general movie and TV podcast called Nerd Nuptial, which I hosted with my wife.
Yes, and both excellent. And you can find me as Kessel Junkie out there on the internet, KESSELJUNKIE. Twitter, unfortunately, but also Instagram and Letterboxd offering reviews. And since Tristan talks about his archive shows, you can check out Great Shot Kid on the Nerd Party, which I did with Mike Schindler, which was one of our many collaborations looking at things that Star Wars creators did that wasn't Star Wars because things. And you can find me actually. I thought so too. It was fun.
I listened to every episode.
It died before its time, no question. But you can find me hosting a current show on the Nerd Party when I'm not having the occasional guest spot over on Franchise Fatigue with Brandon and Zach. A show called Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast that I co-host with Matt Rushing right here on the Nerd Party. So with that, thank you for joining us in this latest episode of House of Fincher. And I don't know, y'all come back now?
I hope next time you'll accept our friend request and join us for Social Network.
I like that one.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.